So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for April 29th, 2020. We'll follow the issue which was in the TSC repo. And we'll start out by asking if anybody has any announcements that they'd like to share. I guess if not, if anything else, it's worth mentioning that the agenda or the schedule for the OpenJS conference has been published, as well as confirmed that it's virtual for that and the summit. And I guess for on the Node project specifically, we should be thinking about any summit topics that we want to make sure we get into the summit. I guess one of the issues we might talk about that a little bit later on in the meeting.
Is this the first meeting since the 14.0 release, or was that last week?
I think that was last week, but it's worth mentioning as well. Okay, if nothing else, let's move on to the issues that were tagged. So the first one is dispute of blocked running on EOL Windows versions 31.954. Alternate suggestion. Do we have the person who tagged it for the agenda here? Let me just take a look.
So I can talk about that.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So basically, the question is about, there's a piece of code in the node that checks the Windows version and exits if the version is not supported. So right now, a couple of weeks back, there is a PR which attached Windows 7 in the list. And according to a couple of users who raised an issue, says that Windows 7 to the next supported version, which is Windows 10, is not a free upgrade. And as long as Node is working fine on Windows 7, we should continue to support that as opposed to exiting it. So that's the problem. The dispute is about whether we should especially consider Windows where we are not doing it for other platforms as such. The cons or the drawbacks of taking it off, in my opinion, is one is right now it's covered under one warning. And if there is any anomalies that can happen before the warning can be printed, then it is as good as we are allowing the user to run on unsupported OS version and not able to provide any meaningful information. Secondly, when the problem happens, it's not very easy to figure out every time that the user is running on an unsupported version. We'll have some iterations before we actually figure out, okay, this is Windows 7 and problem is because of that. And the third one is mainly on the security and the compliance issues. There are some regulations which says we're not supposed to run on unsupported versions, but throwing it out is as good as we are endorsing that. I'm not very strong on either directions, but I just stated the pros and cons.
I guess it might be worth also mentioning that at least my perception is that the people who are on the Windows team for Node, Joao, Bartos, are very seem opposed to allowing this, although they're open to the suggestion that James made about having a flag to allow it. In principle, I'm in favor of allowing people to run on platforms we don't support. Just we don't support it if you run into a bug. But in practice, I would be very reluctant to go against the recommendations of the people who are supporting Windows for us in a lot of ways. It's one of the hardest platforms. It's one of the platforms that we have difficulty supporting, and I think that I would defer to their judgment on this.
Yeah, sorry that I missed it.
Is there
you did great. Are you kidding?
Is there anyone opposed to the suggestion by James about an opt-out flag that will still print the warning, but will allow the binary to run? The runtime opt-out flag.
Well, I would certainly strongly prefer not to have the flag.
Yes, because,
I think adding flags to Node.js is something that, you know, it's something that some users will be able to use, but that's mostly like not end users who run on Windows devices, I think.
We can also add
why wouldn't they be
compile
able to use the flag? It's because it's buried down somewhere, or?
I would assume that that is the case. Like I feel like flags usually target like I might be wrong, but target like either programs that wrap Node in some way, or that, you know, or when Nodes runs in an enterprise server context or something where people can set their own flags and like can micro optimize Node to fit their own needs. Not usually, you know, end users who use applications that
but the
that
error
are written in
message.
Node.
Sorry, but the error message that exits Node and Windows on unsupported Windows versions can actually mention that flag.
Right, but like on Windows, you don't even necessarily get to see that error message because you're not always running programs from a terminal.
But I think if you're running, are you thinking more like someone running an application that has Node embedded in it, as opposed to someone just like using Node itself?
More like the former, yeah. Like we know that some Windows applications just ship with Node in order to be able to run JavaScript.
So I would imagine in those cases, and then this is an interesting one to consider, the people shipping the applications, like perhaps Electron, could choose to instrument Node with that flag when they're deploying it, which could, like, if we think about, you know, like Slack is built with Node, they could run the instance of Node embedded in Electron with that flag, which could then in turn enable it to run on Windows 7 machines.
So just for context, Electron apps are not affected because they are not running that code path that errors out.
Also,
is the ability to set them in an environment variable help at all? Like you could set it on your Windows 7 machine, and now that would apply the flag to all Node apps that ran.
I could see like how somebody who ships Node with their application just unconditionally enables that flag from the install area.
Perhaps a compile time option would be also good, because if someone compiles their own Node binary and redistributes that, it's probably on them to support the platforms. And if they want to opt out of that, like we can make it easier with the compile time flag, as opposed to just commenting out that code path or adding an environment variable. But I'm not convinced that we should actually do that. I think that just a runtime flag would probably be enough for most cases until someone complains or requests a compile time flag.
So these regulations that Gireesh mentioned, are they satisfied if we provide any sort of method out? So, you know, at what point can we claim that we're following the regulation, saying that we do not really support it? You know, how many hoops does a user have to go through to enable support for Windows 7 in Node without us getting into trouble for claiming that we don't support Windows 7, but then we do? So at what point are the regulations satisfied? How many of these flags do we need?
If I understand correctly, the security compliance and regulations, if you are writing a software which runs on unsupported platforms on a free basis, then the responsibility goes to the person or the organization that runs the application. Whereas because we specifically have a check over there saying that if this is lesser than this version, we are putting a printf. That means we very well know that we are allowing the users to run on unsupported OS. Morally, I guess the responsibility partly come to the runtime as well, as my understanding.
So I guess Rich
so
has.
I do want to say something that I put in the chat, which is that there's an active conversation going on in the issue tracker about this right now. And any conversation we have here is just going to have to end up there anyway for there to be the full context of a single conversation going on. And I'm wondering if we actually don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this today, leave it on the agenda for next week and see how things go, because this isn't a time sensitive, there's not like a window that's closing here.
Makes sense to me.
Yes, let's move this to GitHub until there is a specific proposal with a pull request, I think.
That said, Myles, was there something you wanted to say?
I'll just add one bit really quickly is, are we consistent? Like Ubuntu, I think it's 14.04 just went end of life. Do we?
No, we don't. That's in the issue tracker. We treat Mac OS, Linux, and Windows differently in terms of in these terms. Yeah, we're not consistent.
I don't see why we should try very hard just to be consistent here. It's like more of a balance like thing to me.
Yeah, I think a case could be made that the expectations and idioms on one platform about what you can run on end of life operating system may vary, and I think that might be okay, but that's a discussion to be had for sure.
Okay, so anything else since before we take the conversation back to the issue tracker and move to the next thing? If not, okay, let's move on to the next issue, which was tagged, which is the throw on unhandled exception dash rejections equals default 33021. This was on last week, and I think we agreed to leave it on and continue discussion in the issue. Does anybody have an update in terms of, has anything changed on that front?
So there was quite a lot of ongoing discussion in one of the PRs, and then there is a Twitter poll actually also open, and that could be looked at, and there is also a draft for a survey done by Matthias. And thank you very much for that. And that's iterated upon at the moment as well. That's the current status.
Okay, right, because as I remember, Nate, remind me, the plan was to do that survey as kind of the next step before doing anything like a vote or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything for us to discuss this week?
I personally would just keep it ongoing as it is right now.
Okay.
Just to clarify, that is targeting 15, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so unless it sounds like that one we should just leave on the agenda, but nothing necessarily to discuss this week. The next one was HTTP align stream writable 31818. I'm just looking who attended. So Rich, you added that to the agenda, right? And I guess you asked for a vote.
Hello.
Effectively.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Matteo.
Okay, sorry, I didn't. Well, I was not coming through. I was talking and not coming through. So, yeah, I can speak about it, Rich, if you think.
Yeah, please do, Matteo. Please, thanks.
Yeah. So the key thing is that Node. So HTTP and HTTP outgoing message. It's not a writable, a stream writable, and it has never been. It cannot, for performance reason, it cannot inherit from that class. There's no way. So this is kind of the problem and where the source of problem starts with. Now, HTTP outgoing message evolved from streams 1. And it's kind of a sibling of stream writable. For consistency reason and providing a unified API to your users, Ranang would like to align some of the error handling of writable to the one, sorry, for one of the HTTP outgoing to the one of writable, which essentially goes into throwing something and passing it on call, or emitting errors versus before it was thrown, or vice versa. I am essentially one versus the other. I always confound myself because of this. So essentially, it's that is kind of the problem, and I would. It's going to a vote because Brian White was as some sort of is not happy with the change. He does not want the change to happen, and he would like to. It still has an outstanding objection.
Yeah, I believe the objection he has is that he about throwing versus emitting an error, if I recall correctly.
Yes, but that still applies as well to streams. So in those cases,
right.
So, so that is the difference, and I don't think there is any way to change the stream.writable behavior. In that regard, it would not work well. So the opinion is to move it, to change HTTP outgoing message, or keep the two different forever and ever, essentially.
And I guess my understanding is that we don't think it's going to have significant ecosystem impact.
There's some discussion about, whether the is finished package might be affected, because that's not on Canary in the Gold Mine. And James helpfully tagged a few people who are framework maintainers, who then helpfully tagged there's a team for that now. Web Server Frameworks is the team that has Fastify, Restify folks on it, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's getting some eyes from relevant people in the community, and I think I answered your question, and I think I should stop rambling, but if I didn't, let me know. And also I should add that there are 6, I sort of did a, use emoji to indicate where you stand on this thing. And 6 people from the TSC so far have given their approval to this. And I think actually we might be able to infer a 7th approval from Anna because she approved the change. And she's here, so she can indicate whether that would be correct or not.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind promoting Anatoli?
Yep, sure. Thanks. So I guess at this point, is there more for us to discuss? Do we need to wait until that feedback in terms of breaking changes? More people, I guess, Rich, it'd be good if more people weighed in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this should stall, but I don't think we have to make a decision today. But it would be really great if people could make a point to take a look at that. And it needs to come to a vote because it's at an impasse. And so even if you think that even if you think that you don't have an opinion on this or don't have time for this right now, an abstention helps because it gets us, it lowers the, it lowers the threshold for a successful vote. So please participate one way or another. Explicitly opt out or participate.
I would kindly go back to Ronak and kindly ask him to verify if this does not break is finished.
Yeah, we could ask him to do that, but actually, I was going to go ahead and just do that locally right now.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah, but we can also put it on Canary in the Gold Mine. I think that module deserves to be there anyway.
Yeah, so I'll open up an issue in the Canary in the Gold Mine tracker. I'm not going to add it, but somebody certainly can. I'll open an issue in the tracker, and I'll run the is finished tests locally with Node compiled with the change in that PR, and I'll report into the issue about the results.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion before we move on? Sounds like not. Okay. Let me just say Rich will check and comment issue. Okay, so the next issue is replacement of unsupported versions of Windows runtime exit 33108.
That's the same as the one we were discussing earlier, right?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, one's an issue and one's a PR, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So there is a PR.
There's a PR to
Yes,
change the behavior, but it hasn't incorporated the flag suggestion yet.
Okay, so but if that's the one, okay, I just moved that one up to be up with the earlier discussion then. Moving on to the things in the TSC repo, so nominations for chair, again, just on for FYI until that closes later this week. Node future directions, any interest in online or in-person summit. So a couple of weeks ago, I took the action to come up with some concrete options, which I have, and I've added them as a comment in that issue. Let me just find, hold on. Scrolling to the bottom. There's been a few comments, some of the concrete things that I added to the list is, we can decide we don't need to do anything on this front and just close it out and say, okay, we don't necessarily need to think about, hey, what we're going to do in the next 10 years. We could pause the idea for 3 months and revisit to say, like, this is not a good time. Let's see if it's a better time in 3 months. We could switch to trying to do it over a longer period of time. So instead of trying to do it like summit style, we could say, maybe we do a 2-hour session every other week or at some, some interval. We could plan, as outlined in the issue talking about logistics, we could plan, for virtual sessions in early June. late July, some point later in the year. You know, all again, these are like the let's stick to trying to get it in over 1 week, but doing it virtually. We could try and plan into the upcoming summit at OpenJS World, you know, maybe just a subset of the sections that were part of that. So like we could maybe start with the retrospective of what worked in the first 10 years. The next option is like to do that and, you know, maybe the forward-looking session. So maybe like try and get 3 hours to do those two. And then the last one is to do that, like try and get like a session, good length session at the virtual OpenJS World, and then continue to talk about topics that we won't have covered, you know, at some interval in the weeks after, like, you know, a 2-hour session every other week. And there's a whole bunch of other variations. You know, I just kind of ended up with, given the current situation, you know, I still think, you know, the in-person together, like, or even a more concentrated, like trying to do it in a week, maybe might work better, but given the environment, that's, you know, maybe not feasible. So therefore, you know, maybe if we have that session at the OpenJS virtual conference to start with, and then try and plan to have follow-on meetings, that may be the most practical. Are there any like other alternatives people want to throw into the list or comments?
My is definitely I recognize that these are very important topics, and especially because we are discussing for the next 10 years, having in-person conference style sessions make sense, but given the current situation, probably we should look out for a better opportunity sometime later this year also. That would be my first preference. That is no cutting short of the topics, and still in-person meeting whenever the opportunity arises.
Any other comments, suggestions?
Are we looking to make some kind of decision today? Like what's the desired
I mean,
outcome of this?
when we talked about it before, we thought that like maybe putting some concrete suggestions would help move the discussion forward.
Okay.
We don't need to make a decision today, although you know, if we wanted to get into something into the summit, we can't delay too much longer, I don't think. So
Yeah, that helps.
Maybe we can leave it on the agenda for next week, but our time is, for some of the options at least, our time is probably, you know, within the next few weeks we need to make a decision if we're going to consider those or not. So I guess for today, unless, you know, I don't hear a lot of people jumping in, so maybe just, you know, jump into the issue. We'll leave it on to the agenda for one more time, like next week, but we do need to think about like, okay, let's try and make some sort of decision in the next few weeks, even if that decision is just to wait till later, right? Okay, I guess the last thing then on the agenda is the strategic initiatives. Let me open up the issue because I know there's a number of comments there, but I just need to go back there.
You want me to read through them and you can make sure that anything relevant ends up in the minutes?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, that means I actually have to reopen the issue though. So
okay.
I probably should have done that before volunteering. I figured I have time. I'm compiling for that unfinished check. Okay, so strategic initiatives. Here we go. Let's see. Promises. Matteo pointed out that we should resolve the issue that is on the agenda this week, right? So,
Yeah, so it's fine. It's
All right.
progressing. That's, to me, that's the biggest.
Okay,
That's probably the most interesting activity in a while. So.
Okay. James is not here, but reports no significant updates on Quick, working on separating out the non-Quick specific bits for PR. Also, he wanted to point out that there is a proposal for a new strategic initiative, the tracing and metrics initiative. So we should probably go ahead and approve that, or explain why we're withholding our approval.
I don't think there was a PR.
There's okay. Well, there's an issue.
I
Yeah.
suggested a PR, but I don't think there is a PR for us to approve or not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's an issue. If someone wants to open a PR, please do. Nothing to report this week on build from Michael. And I think that might be as far as we got. I thought Mateus is here. Oh, and VA currency, nothing to report. And that just leaves modules and startup performance. So the only ones we haven't touched on.
Hello, modules. So we have unflagged and removed the warning on 14. We're actively receiving more community feedback now, which is awesome. We're seeing more and more modules in the ecosystem begin to adopt some of the new features, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. We are still on path with the intent to remove the flag in the next Semver minor version of Node.js 12. And we are currently, and in the next meeting, going to be debating whether or not we want to see the warning removed. I personally am in the camp that thinks that we should keep the warning on LTS, at least until 14 goes to LTS. But that warning is really important. And if people want an experience that doesn't have a warning, they should use Node.js 14. Aside from that, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I've been receiving so far, and I think is important for us to figure out, is around loaders, and just kind of like some of the things that are not possible to be done in ESM yet, like rewire, like functionality that like modules like rewire offered that are really important for testing and for APMs. So we've been doing a call for more people to get involved in that. And I think one of the things that's important for the TSC to consider here was, the modules team, I think over a year ago now, made the conscious decision to separate the overall modules support and like work that we were doing from loaders itself, because it was causing, like us to kind of get stuck in a bit of a standstill. So if we were looking at stabilizing modules in the fall for LTS, it would be good to know what the expectations are from loaders, and if that's considered, do we need loaders to be stable in order to stabilize modules themselves? We haven't had clear signals on that yet. I don't think that the modules team is intending to have loaders stable in order to call ESM stable, but members of the TSC may have a differing opinion, and I think that now would be a very good time if if anyone had a differing opinion, to kind of voice it and potentially kind of get involved to help us move it over the finish line.
I think that having both stable, like calling one stable required calling the other stable. So I'm potentially this can get stable on node 14. I will be very, very skeptical and opposing removing the warning and calling it stable on node 12, which will give a signal of, well, to the community, don't use them across the line, and postpone the mass adoption if people need to support multiple versions of Node.js. But that's a middle ground. I would really prefer to have a working solution, a working solution for loaders way before then, and to solve certain class of problems, the one you mentioned between APMs. And now this is a crossover to some extent between folks that are in the diagnostics working group and the folks in the modules working group. Considering the fact that there is significant activity in the new APIs on async hooks and stuff, it might gain from some of that. So if there is people that are willing to invest time, there might be the good time to actually ask them to be able to step in. So that's it. Essentially, from my point of view, it's not feasible to run ESM on a server in production without loaders. So if that is, so that will be the my recommendation. So if that doesn't call it stable, I don't know what the definition of stable would be. Like it can be stable, but you can't use it for production. So is it stable? I don't know. This is a question mark on, we can call it stable, but it's not, you know, the advice would still be don't use it because there is no loaders. So you can't do APMs, you can do testing, you can do a lot of things. So.
Yeah, well, we have loaders, but loaders could change. So I guess like that would be one of the higher level questions, but
as much as async hooks can change, which is still experimental. So as long as those cases are met and there is some sort of stability contract between on the LTS branches, that's probably okay. So async hooks are experimental in theory, but they are used by everybody running Node in production. So, which makes them kind of not experimental to some extent. So
I think part of the reason why they're marked as experimental right now is less because they don't have functionality, but more that there's interest in potentially significantly changing the interface to make them composable or to make them faster. Now, I think with that being said, you know, we have a meeting for modules where a lot of these conversations happen. And I guess my ask to the TSC or to those who are watching who care about this, the modules team has limited bandwidth, and we've spent the time that we have on getting kind of the interface to where it is. But we've been stalled in getting loaders done. I know people are putting work there, but like if you care about loaders, we need more support there. Is just kind of the simple ask.
Myles, when is the next modules meeting? Next week, right?
Yeah, it's next Wednesday. Also, for what it's worth, you know, we've had the same meeting time since we've started meeting. And if people want to get involved, but the meeting time doesn't work for them, totally reasonable for ask us to change this.
If you want to do a one-off related to loaders and stuff involving other people, make a call, because at that time, for example, won't work for me at all. So I'm not even. I can write an issue down on my thoughts. So that will be.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we wanted to keep some time at the end, so let's move on. I think
there was also the startup.
Right. Is there? I was just going to ask if there's anything people wanted to say on that one.
But okay then.
Okay, so I guess at this point we'll close out for today. If people can stick around, thanks for everybody who's on the live stream. I'm going to close that out.